Hello. Thank you for joining our webinar series. I'm Taryn Yates. I'm the Idaho Children's Trust Fund Grant Manager and / Planner. This is my first time making a recording using Zoom, so hopefully there won't be too many technical issues. I believe this is just going to be a recording that you can watch. So I hope you enjoy it, and if you have any questions that you come across as I'm talking, please jot them down. This will be posted on the Idaho Children's Trust Fund page and maybe some other pages, and you can ask questions in the comment section, and I will do my best to go and review that fairly regularly so I can answer your questions. All right, so I'm going to share my screen so you can look at the webinar. Here we go. All right, here we go. So hopefully you all are seeing this. So this is our first in a series of webinars we will be making for the month of April and beyond. This one is brain development and reactions in the time of crisis, which is what I chose to call it because we'll be going over the basics of brain development, but also talking a little bit about our current situation that we're all facing. All right, so this is just a little bit about me. Like I said, my name's Taryn Yates. I'm a licensed master of social work. I'm the grant manager planner for the Idaho Children's Trust Fund, which is the Idaho affiliate for Prevent Child Abuse America, or Prevent Child Abuse Idaho. And here is my email and our website in case you are interested in that. This is a picture of me and my kids. I hope I am not interrupted by my kids or my dog during this. My husband is walking my kids right now, so I got the house, quiet house to myself. And my dog is in the background, and she's a bit unpredictable. So let's go over some learning targets, what I hope you can walk away from after viewing this video. Number one, understand the basics of brain development. 2, understand how stress and trauma can affect the way the brain develops. 3, understand how brains that developed under stress may differ from brains that didn't. 4, discuss current events and how our brains could be processing all this. And 5, briefly introduce protective and mitigating influences. But first I want to tell you a little bit about the Hope Conquers ACEs initiative. So this is an initiative that is housed inside the Idaho Children's Trust Fund, but involves a myriad of partners and individuals from all sorts of fields, other social workers, teachers, even therapists that we have. We have trainers all over the state that go into their communities and train on brain development, train on adverse childhood experiences, train on protective factors and positive experiences and how those things can mitigate the effects of trauma. And we hope to do this so that people who work directly with children and families can increase their knowledge, can increase their skill set and their empathy, and really start approaching their work from a more healing engaged or trauma-informed place. So let's start with the story of the brain. The brain is just, I really geek out about this stuff. I find the brain really fascinating, and I think having a basic working knowledge of what's going on inside your head, literally, can really help you understand yourself, your clients, the people you work with, your students if you're a teacher, or I mean, even your family members sitting around the Thanksgiving table. If we're ever able to sit around a Thanksgiving table again, which I'm confident we will be. All right, so the brain's incredible, and I'm hoping that this picture of my head is not blocking you all, so maybe I'll move myself over here. The brain is an incredible thing. It's completely unique compared to the other organs in your body. If you think about, you know, all your organs are incredibly important, but your liver and your lungs or your hand, for example, they all grow at roughly the same rate, assuming you're getting adequate nutrition growing up. your hand's going to grow to be the size of your hand, no matter what. Your liver is going to end up the size of your liver, no matter what. But your brain grows. Say for example, that you were a person that in prehistoric times that grew up in a cave system. Well, your brain would completely wire so that your other senses were stronger than your sight, so that you could survive the best you could in that situation. And no matter what environment you grow up in, your brain wires accordingly. Your brain is a work in progress. From the moment your brain starts developing in utero till the day you die, your brain is developing, your neurons, new connections are being made. Dr. Jack Shonkoff from the Harvard Center of the Developing Child said this quote in one of his podcasts that really stuck with me. He said, "It's never too late, but earlier is better." And this is really important to wrap your head around when it comes to talking about brain and how we as a society should think about the policies and the environments we create in order to have optimal brain development for everyone. What would that look like? Well, we'd have to start early. Now, these are a couple of slides I got right off of the Center of the Developing Child out of Harvard University. The website's right there. They have just a plethora of information if you want to do a deeper dive. But I like the next couple of slides are from there as a way to kind of visualize this concept that Dr. Shonkoff is talking about. So if you look, it's the amount of effort change requires in the brain's ability to change in response to experiences. So here you have a 2-year-old whose brain can develop, there's my little head is in the way again, whose brain can really develop quite easily and readily very early on. And if you'll notice, this 7-year-old person, their brain absolutely can still change in response to experiences. It just takes a lot more effort. So if you think about learning a new language, a 2-year-old's going to pick that up real fast, and a 7-year-old can still do it. It's just going to take a lot more time. So I love the way there's this cross here at around age 30. And as someone who is past that, I can say things do seem to take a little bit more effort once you pass this line. But of course, we always talk about how important early education is, and that's can be demonstrated in this next slides. Human brain develop neural connections for different functions develop sequentially. So if you look at this, I think I accidentally have this on some sort of animation. Let's see if I can go back. Oh, I don't know why that is. Okay, I'm sorry about that. But this is just your first year. The sensory pathways really peak right after they're born. Language, your ability to learn a new language, oh darn, is really happening quite early. Oh, there we go. Now it's not moving anymore. Oh, it's still moving. Okay. Well, so anyway, so yeah, this first year is incredibly important. And if you notice, by year 3, everything's really peaking. And that's why we talk about how important that first, I'm just gonna move on, how important that first 1,000 days is, or the early years. You hear a lot about this. And it's just because that's that peak, that's when you're laying the foundation of the brain down. And so it's really gonna be the easiest to get the optimal brain development. You're gonna need to start really early. So your brain is completely unique among organs. I thought we'd talk a little bit about the basics, brain basics, and I'm using, for simplicity's sake, the John Medina model. He wrote a book, Dr. John Medina wrote a book called Brain Rules, and he also wrote Brain Rules for Baby, and I believe there's one that I haven't read yet called Brain Rules for the Aging Brain, which I should read. So he talks about the brain in he breaks the brain down to these 3 parts: the neocortex, the limbic brain, the reptilian brain. So let's think of this as the reptilian brain, that lizard brain, is really sort of the brain stem. And that's the part of the brain that is when you are first born, it's there, it's in charge of your breathing, your digestion, all the things that you don't have to think about. And all your instincts. So when, if you've ever seen a newborn baby have a checkup with their doctor and they check certain reflexes, these are things that you're just born with. The limbic brain, or the cat brain, is the emotional or feeling part of the brain. That's, the middle part of your brain. It's kind of this thumb if you're using the hand model of the brain, where the brainstem is here. The thumb is your emotional brain, and the neocortex lays over here. So the cat brain, it's the fight, flight, food, those instincts this is your survival. That keeps us safe during those short bursts of stress. And then the neocortex is this like thin layer of jello that lays over, and it's just right, your prefrontal cortex is here, and it's just the human part of the brain. It's the part of the brain that's responsible for all the things that make us human: language, that deep connection to another human, the love of art that we have, that sort of all the good things about humanity are based here in the neocortex. It's also the part of your brain that's responsible for what we call executive functioning. This is an important part to remember, because executive functioning is your brain's ability to sort of manage itself. It's being able to wait in a line, being able to prioritize different things, being able to sort of cope with stress and do other things, multitask, all the things, the sort of basic things you really need to, to perform academically, for example, or to go out in the world and I would say adulting, but honestly, we expect a lot of this kind of stuff from children too. Children need to be able to wait their turn, take turns to share, that sort of thing. That all is executive functioning. And this little blurb that's on the bottom, but again, you can't see because my head's in the way. The cortex grows best when we are not feeling like we need to run, hide, fight, or eat. So all the basics need to be taken care of before your cortex can really thrive. And we'll keep talking about that. All right, so your environment shapes the brain. So you've seen all the kind of basic brain pieces. This is a really important concept to understand. In this picture, you'll see a brain that's sort of a little garden brain. So I want you to ask yourself, take a moment to think, especially you gardeners that may be watching this, what makes a garden thrive, right? So it's, the same, it's nutrients in the soil. I'm planting a garden right now in isolation, and I'm learning things. So you need soil, you need water, you need sunlight, the proper amount of sunlight, not too little, not too much. And that creates this perfect environment for your garden to grow, and it's the same with your brain. So what is the perfect environment for a brain, if we were to carry this metaphor, right? So we have the serve and return relationship. The serve and return is the foundation of laying brain wiring. So brains are built from the bottom up like a house, and serve and return lays the foundation of that house. So when you first have a baby, and that's why there's that picture of the dad cooing at his baby, and you're holding that baby, even little babies, they open their eyes and they make noises at their moms or dads. They coo, and the mom sees that and coos back. And that makes the baby understand that it's being seen and it's real. They start to get this sense that, I'm here and people can see me. And so that's a really important, and that continues on. So you can do serve and return with a much older baby. When your toddler comes up and talks to you and says, Mommy, I should look at this picture I made. And you say, oh, that's so great. Look at this. Look how Green it is. I love all the colors you use. That's a serve and return. That's building their brain circuitry. So, and then I like this picture because it shows sort of the different aspects of serve and return, that physical, emotional, linguistic, social, and cognitive. So to put more simply, touch, talk, read, and play. So just when you're holding your baby or you're massaging their baby, their brain wiring is starting to understand this is what touch is like, this is what pressure is like, this is the different types of touch. That talking, they're building that foundation for their language right away. Babies are born with the ability to recognize their mother's voice. And when they are born, this is sort of neat, they're kind of unilingual, right? We're not omnilingual. So they have the ability to learn any language when they're first born, and very quickly they narrow down to their native tongue. So and that's by the talking they're exposed to, and reading, singing, playing, all these things build the wiring of the brain. So that's how you create optimal brain development for your baby and the babies around you. Just talk to them, interact with them a lot. Okay. All right. Let's talk about the opposite. Like if we think back to the garden, what would make a garden do the opposite of thriving? What would make a garden wither? So that's neglect, just leaving a garden without water, without food. It makes me think of like the desert, just a lot of sun and nothing else. And so neglect in the brain. So for infants, neglect is what we call a double whammy. And that's because babies are born with this need for interaction. Babies don't exist by themselves, right? Like you just don't have babies walking around by themselves, especially out of all species. Human babies are the most vulnerable. And so when they're first born, they really have this biological need for interaction in order for them to get going. In order for that wiring to start being laid down. So the double whammy is in a neglect situation, that wiring's not being laid down. If you have a baby where they're just put in a carrier and left in the corner all day, that wiring's not happening. Also, babies, they process neglect as stress. So because they're born with the need for interaction, if that interaction isn't there, it's stressful. It's the same way they would process. It's almost in terms of the brain, it almost looks like abuse. It can be worse because it is this double whammy. Their cortisol levels go off. It's stressful. And of course, neglect. We're not going to go into attachment a lot here. There's other webinars on that. But when babies are born, they need to attach to that primary caregiver. And that attachment and that co-regulation that happens because baby's nervous system, they're not able to regulate on themselves. They need an adult to help them regulate because their nervous system is immature. So the babies need an adult to hold them and tell them it's okay. And then that helps them calm down. And there's this co-regulation that happens. You can see it happen with my toddler too. If I hold him, he starts patting my arm as I'm patting my back. And there's this beautiful thing that happens between a caregiver and a baby to calm each other down. And it's a mature nervous system helping an immature nervous system calm down. And when there's that strong attachment, that calming happens a lot more smoothly. Okay. All right, so here's some actual physical evidence of how damaging neglect can be on a brain. So if you look at this picture on the left and the right, what differences do you see here? When I'm talking to a live audience, they usually notice first thing, well, the brain on the left is bigger and has less dark spots. And that's because, it's literally bigger. A brain that's neglected is smaller. It just hasn't grown. Those foundational concepts haven't been built. And because the brain develops from the bottom up, if you don't build that foundation well, like a house, if you have a weak foundation, the rest of the house is also going to be structurally not as sound, and the brain is the same way. If you look at these neurons, with the normal brain has a lot more connections, and these under chronic stress, it's been pruned away. All right. Oops. All right, stressing young children. So I've sort of been talking about this the whole time. Some environments are high stress. Long periods of stress for children have a very damaging effect on their brain. The brain is built for a manageable load of stress. So the brain is built for there's what we call positive stress. This is like, sending your child off to kindergarten the first time, or even much younger, leaving your baby with a stranger while you go and take a shower, or like not a baby, but a toddler. Just that little bit of stress where they're like, oh, this situation is scary, I'm not really familiar. And then mom comes back and they're like, oh, okay, I'm fine, I was safe, I made it through that. There's a certain, and then that actually develops the brain. A certain amount of positive stress develops the brain. Then there's what we call tolerable stress, and tolerable stress is something that's quite stressful. It can be something quite bad, like the death of a parent, but there is another parent there that is mitigating the effects of that stress. So say a child was in a car accident, that's incredibly stressful, but if mom is there and is holding the baby and the child and telling them they're going to be okay, that's tolerable, because because stress has a literal effect on the brain, as we've seen. It happens right there in the synapses, right? So mom or another caregiver holding the child, comforting that child, co-regulating with the child has a buffering effect, a very literal, poignant buffering effect. And that's what makes that kind of stress tolerable. It's still bad. There was just somebody there to help them. The difference between tolerable stress and what we call toxic stress, which we think toxic stress can be overused. Toxic stress is when that same bad stuff is happening, but there's no one there to buffer the effect. So the brain is made for some stress. It's just important that children have support around them to handle stress. So let's talk about, I like this slide because, let's talk about why we have this, why our brains are the way we are, or why are they like this? So it actually is a pretty cool little survival mechanism that came from when when we were new humans in prehistoric times, when we were first evolving, you would get into these situations where, in this picture, you see a saber-toothed tiger. All right, so let's say you see a saber-toothed tiger, and what happens? Your brain sees the saber-toothed tiger. You have something called an amygdala in your brain. You don't really need to remember that. I call it Terminator vision, and not everyone gets that reference, but your amygdala is constantly scanning the environment for danger and assessing. You're not aware that it's doing this. Always assessing. So if I'm a cave woman and I see a saber-toothed tiger, my amygdala is going to say, oh, danger. And it's going to set off the stress response, my fight, flight, or freeze response. And so what that's going to happen is cortisol is going to be released. There's just a mix of hormones. It's going to make my heart beat faster, real fast. The blood in my digestive system is going to stop because that's no longer important. Instead, my heart's going to be pumping and pushing blood out to my muscles so that I can run faster. And that whole thing should last about 8 minutes, because after 8 minutes, you're either going to be safe or you're going to have been eaten. And so that stress response system was beautifully cooked up for our survival, and it was never meant to be ongoing. So there you go. So it's important to acknowledge that stress response system, which was meant for our survival, if it's set off over and over again, like for children who maybe there's domestic violence in the home, maybe there's poverty, it can be all sorts of things that make you feel like it just needs to be that perceived threat, right? That real or perceived threat, like you don't know where your next meal is coming from, or maybe you're living in your car, or you just don't feel safe and your basic biological needs are not being provided for, and or could be either situation. If that is sustained, then your stress response system is triggered over and over again to the point where it's just really on high alert a lot, all the time. So, and that is, so you get these two situations. You get this window of resilience and then the outside the window of resilience. So we're going to go back to the window of resilience, because when you have a healthy stress response system, you should be able to handle stress. Inside the stress, you have this big window of resilience. And when you get a stress response and then you deal with it and you get deactivated and you're fine. So the heart rate increases, your muscles tone, you're still in the optimal zone, you're still able to use your executive functioning. You're able to be like, whew, what can I do? You're problem solving, right? Like you're under threat, but you're still problem solving. And this is people who haven't had childhood trauma can stay in this space a little easier. If you have had childhood trauma, your window of resilience is smaller and it's easier to get outside of it. Okay, so a threat can knock you outside of your window of resilience, whereas some people aren't being knocked outside the resilience. So let's think of this in terms of what we're going through right now, COVID-19. This is a worldwide pandemic. It's a crisis that everyone in the world is facing. So some people may be handling this and problem solving and thinking through this, and some people aren't. And that's why we all need to kind of give ourselves a break, because if you're not, or if you had some childhood trauma that you know about, if you know that your stress response system is a little sensitive because of how your brain developed, you're going to get knocked out of the window of resilience. And this is what it can look like. When you're knocked out of that window of resilience, you can get hyper arousal, stuck on out. This is anxiety, anger, hyperactivity, panic, restlessness, tummy issues, emotional flooding, chronic pain, sleeplessness, hostility, rage, the inability to relax, right? So that's one side of it. So that's when that's the fight part, right? The fight, flight, or freeze, right? The fight or flight is all your blood, you want to do something. It's, and if there's nothing to do, if you have like that, if you just feel out of control, like you have no control over the situation, that's going to be really, it's going to feel yucky inside your body. Yucky is a technical term. And you're just going to be freaking out, also a technical term, right? You're going to be freaking out, and that's okay. That's what we know happens. So that stress and traumatic event, which I think we can all say that this has happened. We all have the stress traumatic event. It's going on in all of our lives right now. So the hyper arousal, stuck on off, is the freeze aspect of fight, flight, or freeze. Depression, chronic fatigue, low blood pressure, again, tummy issues, exhaustion, numbness, pain, dissociation, disconnection. So this is, living in a fog, you can't concentrate. Your brain has told you that to be safe, you need to disconnect. And this is going to be, some people are going to have a really hard time explaining why they're doing that. When this first happened, I had a really hard time concentrating. I got stuck in this hypoarousal zone for a while, and I think that's perfectly normal. So under normal circumstances, if you were a teacher and you were seeing this in a classroom, for example, the hyperarousal looks like the kid who threw a chair at you just because you asked them to turn in their homework, right? Obviously that kid, their window of resilience is pretty low, and it doesn't take a lot, and it's because they don't feel safe. They never feel safe, and that's, you know, to get them to stop reacting like that, they need to go to a place where they feel safe. And that can be really challenging to establish that kind of environment for a child whose system is kind of always outside of the window of resilience. And for the hypoarousal, I mean, that's going to be the child that's staring out the window. They look like they're just not paying attention, and they can be really frustrating, but they can be having this reaction that's outside of their control. All right, so when we live in fear, the cortex suffers. In brain development, that neocortex that we talk about, that upstairs brain that's that's imperative to, you know, self-regulation, the ability to calm yourself down, the ability to interact with others, all that emotional competence. The cortex has a harder time developing under that. So this quote here: if the infant is marinated in safety, an emotionally stable home, the system cooks up beautifully. If not, normal stress coping processes fail, and the child is transformed into a state of high alert or complete collapse. And that was kind of the window, the slide I just showed you. I'm gonna have to just keep moving this window all around. All right. What's the single most important thing for a brain to learn, to be able to, that a brain requires to learn? And that's a feeling of safety. So your brain can be doing one of two things at one time, okay? Protecting or connecting. And I like to say this phrase because it helps you understand. So protecting is when the brain feels that it's not safe and it needs to get its self safe through the fight, flight, or freeze. Connecting is everything else. Connecting is being able to learn, being able to have some emotional connection with another person, appreciating art. That's the connecting, is the all happens through the upstairs brain, the cortex, right? But you have to feel safe before your cortex engages. So protecting or connecting. Your brain has to feel safe so that it can let go of that and move on. Like, oh, okay, I'm safe here, now I can learn. That's a really important thing to do, especially to understand if you work with children or yourself. So if you're really having a hard time focusing or something, you can do a little check-in with your body, and you probably don't feel safe. So that's what's going on with you, and now you know, and you can try to work with that. Okay. What's predictable is preventable. So now we know how trauma can affect your brain, and how someone who grew up with that optimal brain development and a feeling of safety, and they have this really high functioning stress response system that only goes off when it's absolutely needed, versus someone who didn't get that kind of, who didn't have such a safe feeling environment, didn't have the stimulation they needed. And their stress response system is wired to go off too fast, right? So now we know that adverse childhood experiences and that trauma can be bad for brain development. So there's a whole slew of protective factors that we will, that I'm going to go over very quickly. It's going to be its own webinar. I'm only going to briefly mention it here. And those are, there's 5 of them. There's the Parental Resilience is kind of the first one that I always talk about. And that's just parents, you know, if from a child's perspective, if your parents are resilient, if they've, you know, if their stress response system is well regulated, it's going to be better for the child. And it's never too late. If you're a parent whose stress response system is not well regulated, there are things you can do to help yourself, to help your children. social connections, healthy social connections. And this is difficult right now because we're all isolated right now. But healthy social connections is a really important protective factor for healthy childhood development. Knowledge of parenting and child development, because a parent who understands a child's developmental stages and what to expect, they're going to be more resilient during temper tantrums. Social emotional competence of children, because children who are better at self-regulating are going to have that stronger, and they can identify their own emotions, right? That's going to be the optimal situation. So and then concrete supports of time of need, just having your basic physiological needs met. Having food on the table, having a roof over your head so that you're not worried about that. And you free up brain space when you're not worried about getting your needs met. You free up brain space to connect with your kids. So those are the 5 protective factors. We're definitely going to have a webinar that does a deeper dive on those. So let's talk about your brain in time of COVID-19. Okay, I want to talk about this a little bit so that you can understand what's going on with you and with your children. So in abnormal circumstances, absolutely all reactions are going to be normal. I don't like the word normal, but it's like typical. This is pretty much any reaction you're going to have, right? So we're all grieving our loss of our regular routine. So we are going to be experiencing the emotions that are part of a grieving process. Denial, anger, depression, bargaining, acceptance. And these happen non-linearly, right? So you could be angry one day, depressed the next. You can be accepting and having a good day and then knock back into denial or bargaining, right? Existential dread. This is happening all over the planet. And I don't think, this is unprecedented since probably a world war, where you just felt like the whole planet was in a bad space, right? That's an odd sensation, and I haven't experienced it before. Like, this is everywhere, and it's scary. It's life-altering. These things I put in purple are going to be more common in people who have that a little bit smaller of a window of resilience, and this is not anything to feel bad about. If you have some childhood trauma, your brain gets triggered into your fight, flight, or freeze response system a little easier than maybe some of the people around you. And this is what can be happening to you, that dissociation, feeling like you're in a fog, your limbs are heavy, you have a hard time focusing, you have a hard time feeling motivated. It's just hard to get you to do things, right? That's a normal reaction. Catastrophizing, that's when your brain is in there like telling you worst case scenarios all the time. Like, oh, this is like, I'm not even going to go there, but I think if your brain does this, you know what I mean. This is, and then my house is going to catch on fire and I'm going to lose everything. And, you can go in really illogical places with catastrophizing. Becoming hypersensitive to stimulus. Like you're probably triggered. And I think our society overuses the word triggered. It's a real thing. Your stress system has been triggered. So you're in a state of hyper arousal. So you can't, this is when your child asks you for a bowl of cereal and you're like, I can't deal with you right now. That's actually going to be pretty typical in the situation that we're experiencing. Panic and anxiety attacks, absolutely. There's not much more panic inducing than a global pandemic. So what the behaviors you could be having, you could be avoiding the news, you could be obsessing over the news, you could be furiously cleaning your house or letting your house get filthy, seeking out healthy and unhealthy self-soothing mechanisms. Maybe you're working out, maybe you're really good at that, that's a healthy one, or maybe you're eating and drinking too much because you're trying to make yourself feel better. Maybe you don't want to do anything at all. Maybe you feel fine one second and then you're having strong surges of fear the next, especially if there's a trigger. Like feeling fine one second and then being on Facebook and you see, this happened to me personally. I remember seeing someone my own age had died and I wasn't really worried about me. I was worried about my parents, right? So then I suddenly was like, well, maybe I should be worrying about me. So this is normal. The whole point of this slide is to understand that whatever reaction you're having during this time is completely normal, because we're not living in normal times. And to give yourself some, and to be kind with yourself, and to be kind to those around you. Some of the most frustrating behaviors, like hoarding, and people should absolutely be told not to hoard, are coming out of fear. So if we could have a little grace and kindness with the way we treat ourselves and our children and our neighbors at this time, because almost everything is coming out of fear. All right, so let's talk some brain hacks. We're going to end this series with hopefully some fun brain hacks to, let's talk about if you're having a panic attack or if you're feeling dissociated. So the first brain hack I have on here is bilateral movement. That's really good for if you're feeling dissociated. Bilateral movement, so you have the two different hemispheres of your brain, right and left, and there's a piece between them called the corpus callosum that helps connect the two hemispheres. So having both of your hemispheres work at the same time is very grounding. That's bilateral movement. Guess what the most normal bilateral movement is? It's walking, right? Because you swing your arms and you're using left, right, left. So that's both your hemispheres working in one, right? So if you're feeling disassociated, I'm going to teach you a little trick. It's called the Infinity 8. And it's really helpful for me, I think. So it's when you take your arm, and you can do this in big. I'm not going to do this as big as I can because I'm on a small screen here. But you take your arm and you make an infinity symbol in front of your body. And if you notice, my right arm is crossing over the midline of my body so that it's really engaging both sides of my brain. And I just do this in big sweeping motions as I breathe for a count of 8. Okay, and then you do the left arm. Same thing, big sweeping motions, count of 8. You can even do both, right? It's a really good way. You do this for like 5 minutes, and I promise you're gonna be more focused, more engaged. So if you find yourself, you're like, you know what, I have to get this report to my boss, and I cannot focus, try the Infinity 8. It's a brain hack. The other thing is deep breathing. So you have this big nerve that travels down the length of your body called your vagus nerve. So you can hack your vagus nerve into thinking that you're calm if you breathe in this way. There's square breathing, which is 4-sided breathing, right? Picture a square. And that's in for 4 seconds. 2, 3, 4. Hold it for 4 seconds. 2, 3, 4. Breathe out slowly for 4 seconds. And then you pause for 4 seconds. And repeat. In. Hold it. Out. Pause. In. Hold it. Out. Pause. So when you're fight, flight, or freeze, when you're in fight or flight mode, your breathing's going to get rapid. And by consciously slowing your breathing down, you can pull yourself out of that response. So your brain's going to have these tendencies to do these things when you're afraid. And there's a way to try to hack that response. Positive self-talk. I know it sounds silly, but it totally works. You just have to tell yourself you're going to be okay. A lot, things are going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. You're going to be okay. You're safe in this place. You have enough food here. You're safe. Your children are safe. You're okay. And if you don't have enough food, your positive self-talk can be going to be okay. I have a plan. I've called the food bank. I'm going to go pick up some food tomorrow. We're going to be okay. And then lastly, focus on something you can control. The whole world feels really out of control right now, and there's a lot going on that we have no control over. So, do something that you can do, like learn a new recipe or organize your closet. Set a goal around that. Like, I'm going to cook a brand new recipe once a week until this is all over, that kind of thing. All right, so there is help. We're coming to the end of this webinar. I hope it was helpful for you. Please, if you're in a state of fight or flight because you don't have your biological needs met, that's the first thing you're going to have to do. That's just the way the human brain works. You're going to need to feel fed and housed. You're going to need all that to be okay. So call the Idaho Care Line 211 or the Idaho COVID-19 helpline. The number's right here, 1-888-330-3010. Or lastly, if you're really struggling with your mental health issues, which is understandable, and please seek help. There's the Idaho Suicide Prevention Hotline. Be kind to yourself. Don't feel bad. Everybody needs help during this time. If you have any questions about this webinar, we will be posting out on several websites. Again, I invite you to post some questions. I'm going to be reviewing them to the most that I can. As well as other staff at the Idaho Children's Trust Fund. Roger Sherman, who is the executive director, will be reviewing it, and we can respond. We have a whole team of people who are experts on this stuff that are trainers for the Health Conquers ACEs initiative. So again, please take care of yourself. We're all in this together. Good luck, stay safe, and wash your hands. Thank you for watching.